Hi there, my name is Irene, and in this video we'll learn how we can create 2D objects in Sketchup using images as reference. So let's get to it. Alright, so before we can get started, we need to talk about what our reference image will be and basically why would we use this method. So the idea here is that there's going to be sometimes things that you need to model that you either do not have the time to model such a complex thing and it's not a part of your custom design, so it is not worth for you to spend all of that time modeling it, or the nature of the object is too complex to capture just with SketchUp geometry, even if it's 3D. And by these, I refer specifically to materials. So I'm going to tell you from the get-go, my main use for this method is for lighting fixtures. So a lot of times you are going to be working with lighting fixtures where the main feature of it is going to be its material properties, the way that the light bounces on the surfaces and the shapes of that lighting fixture. And because of the limitations of SketchUp materials, there's gonna be no way for you to recreate that effect, even if you model the lighting fixture perfectly. So in those cases, it can sometimes be easier to model that geometry using an image instead of trying to just model it in 3D. So basically what we're going to be doing is the equivalent of photoshopping that lighting fixture. It's just that it is going to be a real object in SketchUp. So for this exercise, the things that you'll need will be a lighting fixture or other object that you wish to model. Now, when it comes to this image, make sure that the image is as straight on as possible. Whether it has a background or not is not that important, but you want to get a clear shot. Now, this is not a perfect example because as you can see, like I'm not getting a full picture of the lighting fixture. I'm only getting a part of the cord. There are other images where they are showing a little bit better, but I don't know if you can notice, but this freaking wall here is cutting it there. Drives me insane. I don't know why they decided to do it that way, but you know what? Let's for the sake of this exercise, try to use this image. I'll show you why in a second. So the things that you will need are going to be a as good as possible image of the lighting fixture in question and its dimensions. So you can see here that it is telling me that the lighting fixture is 16 inches height by 19 3/4 for the diameter. And they're basically talking just about this portion of the lighting fixture. The cable and the plate at the top is not being taken into consideration. Also, shout out to Design Within Reach. They have awesome stuff, although it is expensive, but I really like them. So I am going to use my handy dandy snipping tool to capture exactly what I want. I'm gonna capture this lighting fixture here. It doesn't matter if I take more or less of the space. It is irrelevant, and then I'm just gonna save it. It doesn't matter what name I give it. I'm just gonna say save. All right, and that is basically all we need in terms of our image. Now, I need to remember these dimensions here, 16 for my height and 19 3/4 for the diameter, because now what I'm going to do is I am going to start by drawing a rectangle in SketchUp. So because this is a lighting fixture, this is a vertical element, so I'm not going to be working in a floor plan view. Instead, I'm going to be working in an elevated view, specifically the front view. So I'm going to go to my front view here, and what I'm going to do is draw a rectangle. And the size of this rectangle doesn't really matter. It does not need to follow the 16 by 19 that we have on the dimensions. I want it to actually be on the bigger side because what's going to happen is that later I'm going to adjust it to fit the needs of my light. But right now I actually want to have some wiggle room. And here is the interesting thing. In a previous video, I've already shown you how to import an image into SketchUp. So you already know how to do that. What I want to show you here is that another way that you can bring an image to use as a reference is by making it a material. And you're going to see why when we get into modeling. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a new material that is going to be my pendant light. And I'm going to choose that image that I just got from Design Within Reach. The size doesn't matter because I'm going to be scaling it when I apply it. So I'm just going to apply it once. That's fine. And now here's where the magic is going to happen. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my guidelines to basically mark those two dimensions, the width and the height. So T for the measuring tape, and remember to create guidelines, you always want to go from an edge. So we said that the height was, I already forgot it immediately, 16 inches, 16, enter. And now for the width, we said that it was 19 3/4. Now here's the interesting thing. What I want to do is I want to find the midpoint, and I'm going to show you why a little bit later. So I'm going to find the midpoint of that diameter, and there you go. And now this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to right click on my image, texture position, and I am going to scale this image so half of my lighting fixture fits in this quadrant here. Because basically the whole reason that I'm doing this is because this freaking image is cutting just that little bit of my object, but basically it doesn't matter because it's a mirrored object, so I can always just like get the other half. So is this perfect? No, but we live in an imperfect world, so we need to learn to just roll with the punches. It is also a relatively pixelated image. Don't think that I haven't noticed, but once again, we kind of have to make do with what we have been given. This is too big right now. I need it to be just a little bit smaller. I could move my pinpoints, but I'm going to be entirely honest with you. I'm kind of lazy. I'm just going to eyeball it. Never be afraid of admitting that you are lazy. Just make sure that you have an alternative plan to accommodate your laziness. And the other thing that I'm noticing, no, you know what? Like the size is pretty correct. I'm going to try to find what would be like the midpoint of this geometry. I think that's it. That looks pretty good. Let's see here. It's capturing the halfway point. Yep, that looks pretty good. So once I have set up my image where I want it, and again, basically what I wanted is middle goes here and then the edges go there in the borders. I'm going to press enter to finish that. And now this is what I'm going to do next. I'm actually going to select these edges and I'm going to move them away so I have a little bit of extra wiggle room. And you're going to see why when we start modeling. Now, I don't necessarily need to keep this line and this line, but I will do for the time being. Because what we're going to do now is we're going to basically use our drawing commands to outline half of the shape of this lamp and then the entirety of this like top plate. I'm not going to draw the cable because as you can see, it's a little bit wonky. So I'm going to model that one a little bit differently. So you can see that this starts as a curved object. So I'm going to go A for arc. And I'm just going to basically follow the outline of this shape. So see, basically the idea here is that I'm just going to draw a 2D version of this object following the image as a reference. So something like this. And you want to take your time to make it as precise as possible. So to avoid boring you, what I'm going to do is I'm going to speed up through this process. And then when I'm done, I will just go back to normal speed. So I will see you in a bit. Alrighty, so if you see, I now have half the outline of my lamp, the full plate, and that's pretty much it, right? So here's where the magic is going to happen. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to start, instead of like having to like draw the whole thing, I am just going to select the outline of this lamp here. I'm going to go M for move, control to make a copy. I'm going to flip it, right? Remember, you can flip 2D and 3D objects. So there you go. That is my half of the lamp. And I can just bring it back over here. And that will give me a perfectly symmetric. Now, if you don't want to see this line here in the middle, you can just hide it. That's perfectly fine. But basically, the material is going to stay mirrored, which is very, very nice. Now, for my cable, I don't want to use the image that they have. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically create my own cable. So I'm going to bring my measuring tape again and create guidelines like very, very thin. I don't want this cable to be super thick overall. And then I'm just going to move these guidelines so they are, because right now they're slightly offsetted. So I'm going to move it there. And I'm just going to create 2 lines for my cable. There you go. You and you. Perfect. Awesome. So I'm going to delete my guidelines. And here is the cool part. Basically, because my reference image was the material, now all I have to do is get rid of the excess. And what I end up with is a geometry that perfectly follows the outline of my image, which is pretty cool. Now, keep in mind that it is a one-sided object. I don't have any material on the other side, but here's where things are going to get interesting. Because basically, here's where I'm going to introduce you to a very particular kind of component, which is a 2D component, which always faces the camera. So this is one of those options that if we go all the way back to when I introduced you to components, I said like, hey, I'm just going to ignore this for the time being. Well, now I'm finally going to address it. So one thing that you can do when you create 2D components is you can make them in such a way that they will always face the camera. So that way, basically, you never get to see that they are a flat object. So how does this work? Well, very simple. What you're going to do is after you've modeled your geometry, you're going to select all of it and you're going to make it into a component. So let's say I'm going to call it pendant light. Right? Now what you will do is before you click create, you're going to come here to the alignment and you're going to click on always face camera. You also have the option shadows face the sun. So basically this will mean that this geometry has highlights and that it will cast shadows. You can choose if you want it to have it or not. I'm just going to leave it on for this case in particular. And for my component axis, I'm actually going to set them up here at the top. So when it comes to placing axes for your geometry, basically the idea is you want to consider what would be the placement point for the geometry. And that is usually where you want your axes to be. So I'm going to go here now, create, and check it out. Oh, see how it flipped? Now here is the magic. No matter where you put your camera, this guy will follow. So this is why I wasn't concerned about the fact that I didn't have a material for the back of it, because you're never going to see the back of it. So I really, really love this option if you are in a pinch and you really need to put a geometry in your model that you don't have the time to model, or that it has materials that you just really cannot translate through the SketchUp material options. This is a great solution. I will say there are a couple caveats or basically limitations for this kind of component. So number one, these works best when you're working with symmetric and let's just describe them as cylindrical objects. If you're working with something like, let's say like a chair or something that is at a perspective, it's gonna look wonky sometimes. Like you would have to align your camera off the model really well with the angle of the perspective of the object so it looks right. That's why I was saying that it has to be a straight on picture. So I find that that is much easier to work with more simple geometries. Again, I use this very much with lighting fixtures. The other thing that you have to consider is the relationship between these flat 2D object that faces the camera to your 3D object. So let's say that, for example, this is going to be a room that would contain this lighting fixture. Well, if I'm going to, let's say I'm going to place my lighting fixture here in the middle of the room, this is pretty good. It basically doesn't matter where I orbit my camera. The lighting fixture will always look right. But look what's going to happen if I put it a little bit closer to, let's say, a corner. What's going to happen here is that depending on where my camera is looking, oops, let's see. Nope, this is looking good. I placed it too well. Goddamn. Let's say I'm going to put it, there you go. Now I should get my error. There you go. See? So what's going to happen is that the camera doesn't know where that this guy should always be in front of the wall. So if you rotate, the rotation is going to follow the geometry and you may have some clipping issues. So just keep that in mind. These kind of geometry cannot be placed too close to basically other elements that it could clip onto, because SketchUp doesn't understand that this guy should just never clip through anything. Okay. But as you can see, it's a very quick and easy way to create a geometry that packs a ton of detail. If you don't like the edge, the border, because you find it a little bit like too strong against the softness of the image, remember that you can always hide the boundaries of a geometry. Just don't delete them, because then the whole thing collapses. So I could, for example, select the entire thing, right click, I'm going to go here to select and select. I'm going to deselect faces. I just want to keep the lines, and then I'm going to go to edit and I am going to go to hide. And basically this is going to give me an even cleaner look for this geometry. It literally looks like it has been photoshopped, but it exists in the 3D model. So it is a pretty cool way to tackle having to model certain things in SketchUp. And with that, we have reached the end of this video. I hope you found it helpful. If you have any questions, by all means, feel free to add them in the comments. If you like the video, give it a like. Also consider subscribing. But otherwise, thank you very much for joining in. Thank you very much for sticking through, and I will see you in the next one. Have a good one. Bye.